What if a single civilization outlasted empires, invaders, and revolutions for millennia? From ancient kings who ruled before Babylon to modern protests echoing through Tehran's streets, Persia's story is one of breathtaking resilience. How did a culture survive Mongol destruction, Islamic conquest, and Western colonization, only to reshape each of them in return? In this epic journey, you'll travel through 2,500 years of triumph, tragedy, poetry, war, and reinvention, from the tomb of Cyrus the Great to the chants of woman-life freedom. Discover how Persian identity adapted to every conqueror, yet never disappeared. This isn't just history, it's a living legacy. If you love timeless stories, powerful civilizations, and sleeping to the rhythm of history, subscribe now to Sleep Stories TV for more journeys into the past. Long before anyone had ever heard the name Persia, there was another ancient world rising quietly in the shadows of mountains and deserts. In the southwestern lands of what is now called Iran, a people known as the Elamites built one of the earliest civilizations on Earth. Their roots stretch back over 4,000 years. That means they began to shape cities and rituals, while Egypt's pyramids were still new and Babylon had yet to reach its height. They called their land Elam. It was a lush, fertile area fed by rivers that flowed from the nearby highlands. These rivers helped sustain farming trade and urban growth. It wasn't a desert. It was alive and it was full of ambition. The Elamites didn't borrow their ideas from others. They developed their own unique language, their own religion, their own art. In fact, the Elamite language still puzzles historians today. It doesn't belong to any known language family. It's not related to Persian. It's not Semitic like Hebrew or Arabic. It stands on its own like a lost puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit anywhere else. What we do know is that they were skilled builders, thinkers, and warriors. Their capital city, Susa, would later become famous in Persian history. But for the Elamites, it was already the heart of a proud kingdom. Unlike the massive empires of Mesopotamia next door, Elam wasn't ruled by a single all-powerful king in a grand palace. Instead, it worked more like a network of powerful cities that cooperated or sometimes competed. There were kings in Susa and kings in Anshan. Sometimes they shared power, sometimes they didn't. This flexibility may have helped them survive. When wars broke out, when floods came, when empires rose and fell around them, the Elamites kept going. They weren't easy to wipe out. Their religion centered on gods like in Shushanak, who protected their cities and connected rulers to the heavens. Temples were important. Rituals mattered. Priests held real power. Over time, their beliefs would quietly shape others that came after, including Zoroastrianism, the religion that would later define ancient Persia. In this way, the Elamites planted seeds that would sprout long after their names were forgotten. Elamite art and architecture carried a special beauty. They carved images into stone walls. They shaped bronze into tools, weapons, and sacred symbols. Some of their buildings resembled giant step-like towers. Later civilizations would call these ziggurats. But the Elamites may have been among the first to build them. Even their decorative style was unique. They blended local traditions with ideas from neighboring peoples, Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians. In this way, they stood both apart and connected to the world around them. And they were not always peaceful. When they went to war, they struck hard. In one bold attack, Elamite soldiers stormed into Babylon and carried off the statue of Marduk, the most sacred idol of the Babylonians. This was not just a military raid. It was a spiritual earthquake. Taking a god's statue was like stealing a kingdom's soul. It showed the world that Elam was not to be underestimated. It also revealed something deeper. The Elamites understood symbolism. They knew how to use power, not just force. But no civilization lasts forever. Over time, Elam faced invasions, losses, and decline. Assyrian kings would later boast about tearing down their cities and burning their temples. Yet even in defeat, Elam left behind a legacy. Their art, their myths, their influence lingered in the minds of those who followed. And strangely, their blood may have survived too. Modern genetic studies suggest that many Iranians today carry DNA that connects back more closely to Elamites than to later Persians. History, it turns out, leaves traces not just in stone and clay, but in our bodies. The Elamites also hinted at one of the most radical ideas of all. In some of their legal records, there are signs that kings were not all-powerful, that rules existed above the ruler, that succession had limits. Imagine that. 4,000 years ago, a society in ancient Iran may have tried to put law above kingship. That idea would echo through centuries, through Cyrus the Great's cylinder, through Islamic legal codes, through modern constitutions. So when we think about the origins of Persia, we shouldn't begin with kings in golden robes or mighty empires stretching across continents. We should begin in the green valleys of Elam, with its secret language, its silent gods, its fierce raids, and its long, stubborn survival in the face of giants. Before there was Persia, there was Elam, a civilization forgotten by many, but never truly gone. In the ancient world, raiding was more than just stealing. It was a way to make a statement. When Elamite kings marched into Mesopotamia, they weren't just after gold or cattle. They were after power, respect, and symbols. One of the boldest acts in their history came when they took something sacred, the statue of a god. That god was Marduk, the supreme deity of Babylon. By stealing it, the Elamites sent a thunderous message to the rest of the ancient world. No kingdom, no god, not even Babylon itself was safe from their reach. To understand how daring this act was, we need to understand the time. Babylon was not just another city. It was one of the most revered places in the ancient Near East. Its ziggurat stretched high into the sky. Its priests claimed to speak with the heavens. Its god Marduk was more than a divine figure. He was the heart of the city. People believed that Marduk lived in the statue. It wasn't just a symbol. It was the god himself present among the people. To remove it was to unmake the city's soul. And yet the Elamites did it. According to ancient records, one of their kings ordered a raid deep into Babylonian territory. His army pushed past defenses and reached the great temples. With deliberate purpose, they lifted the statue of Marduk and carried it back to Elam. This wasn't a secret theft in the night. It was a loud public humiliation. Taking the statue meant Babylon had failed to protect its god. It was the equivalent of toppling a flag, burning a constitution, or capturing a king. It shook the ancient world to its core. What happened next was even more surprising. The Elamites didn't destroy the statue. They didn't melt it down for gold or crush it under their heels. They kept it. They honored it. In fact, some scholars believe they placed it in their own temple. Why would they do this? Perhaps they believed that keeping Marduk would bring divine favor, or maybe they wanted to show that their gods were now stronger, that they had absorbed the power of Babylon itself. In any case, the theft became one of the most legendary moments of the era. Such an action didn't go unanswered. Babylon remembered. Later kings launched campaigns to retrieve the statue. One of them, Nebuchadnezzar, is said to have finally brought Marduk back home in triumph. When he did, Babylon held grand processions. People wept with joy. The priests chanted prayers of return. For them, Marduk had come back not just in spirit, but in flesh. His return restored balance, identity, and pride. The entire city celebrated, and the Elamites were remembered as the ones who dared take the unthinkable. This raid tells us something crucial about the Elamites. They understood symbols. They knew that power wasn't just about armies or territory. It was about meaning, about emotion, about striking at the heart of belief. In stealing Marduk, they stole more than a god. They stole Babylon's confidence. They turned themselves into more than enemies. They became legends feared and respected far beyond their borders. The story also shows how interconnected these ancient kingdoms were. Elam wasn't isolated. It was constantly watching, listening, and reacting to the moves of Mesopotamia. When opportunity came, they struck fast and hard, and in doing so, they inserted themselves into the long epic of regional politics. They were no longer background players. They were central figures in the great game of empires. But there's another side to this tale. While the raid on Marduk's statue is famous, it wasn't the only time the Elamites raided Mesopotamia. They had a long pattern of conflict and conquest. Sometimes they came as allies, sometimes as rivals. Often they were both at the same time. Treaties were made, broken, and remade. Gifts were exchanged. Armies clashed. Peace returned only to be shattered again. It was a dance of power that went on for centuries. In many ways, the Elamites were masters of this rhythm. They knew when to attack and when to pull back. Their decentralized political system helped them remain flexible. While Babylon built grand empires with centralized kings, Elam kept a looser structure. This made them harder to destroy. If one city fell, another could rise. If one king died, another could step forward. This gave them resilience, and it let them launch surprise attacks like the raid on Babylon. The memory of the statue theft endured. Later civilizations retold the story. They debated what it meant. Some saw the Elamites as villains, others as clever rivals, but all agreed on one thing: the Elamites were a force to be reckoned with. Their courage or audacity left a mark on history. Even today, the story stirs the imagination. It reminds us that power can be stolen with symbols, that gods can be carried like trophies. That belief itself can be shaken by bold actions. The Elamite raid on Babylon wasn't just a moment in time. It was a flash of insight into how ancient people thought, fought, and feared. It shows us that even thousands of years ago, people understood the emotional power of religion, the weight of identity, and the shock of sudden loss. So when we speak of Elam, let us not think only of forgotten ruins and broken statues. Let us remember the day when a king looked westward, saw a city rich in pride, and decided to take its heart. Not with fire, not with walls, but with one statue, one god, and an army bold enough to carry the sky. Survival in the ancient world wasn't easy. Kingdoms rose and fell like waves crashing against stone. Great cities vanished. Mighty kings were forgotten. But the Elamites endured. For nearly 2,000 years, they remained a presence on the Iranian plateau. One of their great secrets, a decentralized political system that gave them unusual flexibility. While other kingdoms relied on a single throne or one supreme ruler, the Elamites distributed power among multiple centers. They weren't ruled by a single capital. They weren't crushed when one king fell. This made them adaptable. If an enemy destroyed one city, another could continue. If a ruler died or was captured, a second king, often ruling from a different region, could take over the reins. Sometimes these kings worked together. Other times they ruled independently. It wasn't always smooth. There were disputes. There were rivalries. But this layered structure acted like a safety net. It allowed Elamite culture, authority, and religion to survive through centuries of chaos. At the core of this system were the twin cities of Susa and Anshan. Each played a central role in different periods. Susa was the religious and ceremonial heart. Anshan, nestled in the mountains, offered protection and strategic control. Together they formed a powerful pair. When enemies threatened, the kings of Anshan could shelter their people in the hills. When prosperity returned, Susa hosted festivals, built temples, and negotiated with neighbors. This rhythm of retreat and return gave Elam a kind of rhythm, a pulse that echoed through generations. Their records show how power was often shared between brothers, sons, and even in some rare cases, queens. Instead of a rigid line of succession, the Elamites allowed more negotiation. This didn't mean peace at all times. Civil wars happened. Yet the structure itself prevented total collapse. The system wasn't built on a single name. It was built on a network of families, cities, and traditions that held fast even when times grew dark. This decentralization also allowed the Elamites to manage diverse regions. Their territory included mountain zones, desert edges, river valleys, and trading corridors. A central authority might have struggled to understand or control such variety. But Elam's flexible model let local leaders adapt rules to their region. It wasn't democracy, but it wasn't tyranny either. It was a complex dance of influence and responsibility. Such resilience proved crucial when war came. Mesopotamian powers like Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon repeatedly tried to dominate the region. Many times they succeeded. But while these conquerors could win battles, they struggled to eliminate Elamite culture. One reason, it was spread across a wide web of towns and people. Destroy one temple and another kept the fire burning. Over and over again, the Elamites reappeared. They rebuilt. They reformed. They reclaimed. Another strength was their ability to learn from neighbors without losing their identity. Through centuries of contact with Sumerians, Akkadians, and others, the Elamites absorbed tools, writing systems, artistic styles, and trade practices. But they always reshaped these into their own forms. Their written language remained unique. Their religious beliefs kept distinct features. They could borrow without becoming copycats. This balance between openness and self-protection is a sign of strong cultural foundations. Their architecture also reflected this adaptability. They built with local materials, clay, mud brick, and stone. Their temples were designed not just to impress, but to endure. In some areas, their structures predated the famous ziggurats of Mesopotamia. These designs, though simple by modern standards, offered stability through floods, earthquakes, and even invasion. The land shaped the buildings, and the buildings shaped the people. Elamite artisans created styles that blended function with beauty. Their pottery, bronze work, and wall carvings show a society with taste, vision, and skill. But what's most impressive is how this creativity continued even during hard times. When empires rise, art often blooms, but the Elamites kept making beauty even in moments of decline. Their creativity was not a luxury. It was a tool of survival. Religion also played a binding role. The Elamites had their own pantheon, their own gods, their own rituals. And Shushanak, the protector of Susa, stood at the center. But each region had local spirits and traditions. These were not erased when power shifted. Instead, they were absorbed, honored, and reinterpreted. This spiritual flexibility helped the Elamites preserve their sense of identity even under foreign rule. Their temples became anchors in a world that often changed too fast. Later empires learned from the Elamite model. The Persians, for example, would later borrow elements of decentralization when building their vast state. The Achaemenids kept local traditions alive in distant provinces. That method may trace its roots back to Elam. The idea that stability comes not from crushing difference, but from managing it, was born in these early lands. Modern archaeology has begun to uncover even more signs of Elamite endurance. Buried tablets, broken statues, fragments of walls. Each piece adds to the picture of a civilization that survived through cleverness, cooperation, and quiet strength. They didn't need to be the loudest. They didn't need to conquer the world. Their victory was simpler. They lasted. In a world where even mighty cities like Nineveh and Babylon eventually vanished, the Elamites held their ground. Not always as rulers, not always with glory, but with roots so deep that even fire could not burn them away. Their decentralized system was not a flaw. It was their secret weapon. A model of endurance hidden beneath the sand. In the rugged highlands of western Iran, long after the Elamites had faded, a new people rose to prominence. They were known as the Medes. Unlike earlier kingdoms, the Medes began as scattered tribes. Each group had its own chief, its own territory, and its own customs. They spoke Indo-European languages and had arrived on the Iranian plateau centuries earlier. For a long time, they lived in small communities, farming, herding, and defending their land from enemies. But then everything changed. A leader named Cyrus came to power, and under his rule, these independent tribes united into a single force. With that union came a goal to destroy the mighty empire of Assyria. Assyria was no ordinary enemy. It was the most feared power in the ancient Near East. Its armies were large, brutal, and well-trained. Its kings built vast palaces filled with riches. Assyrian warriors were known for their cruelty. They destroyed cities, deported populations, and carved their victories into stone reliefs. Their capital, Nineveh, stood as a symbol of terror and strength. Few dared to challenge it. But Cyaxares saw a chance, and he was ready to take it. What made Cyaxares different was his ability to organize. He looked at the disjointed Median tribes and saw potential. He knew that if they could act together, they could stand up to even the fiercest empire. So he reformed the way they fought. Instead of rushing into battle as a wild mass, he divided his army into units, spearmen, archers, and cavalry. Each had its own role. Each trained for its specific job. This was a new way of thinking, and it worked. Cyaxares also understood diplomacy. He reached out to the Neo-Babylonian king Nabopolassar. Babylon too had suffered under Assyrian control. The two rulers made a pact. They would join forces and bring down their common enemy. This alliance was historic. It brought together two very different peoples, one from the Iranian mountains, the other from the Mesopotamian plains. But their hatred of Assyria united them. In the year the siege began, the combined armies of the Medes and Babylonians marched on Nineveh. The city was massive, surrounded by walls that stretched for miles and rose high into the sky. Its defenses were legendary. But no city is invincible. For 3 months, the Allies attacked. They cut off supplies. They battered the gates. Finally, Nineveh fell. The city burned. Its palaces crumbled. The Assyrian Empire, which had ruled with fear for centuries, came to a sudden and dramatic end. The fall of Nineveh shocked the world. One of the great powers had vanished, and in its place the Medes and Babylonians now stood. The Medes quickly expanded their influence. They controlled a vast area from central Anatolia in the west to parts of Central Asia in the east. This was more than a tribal kingdom now. It was an empire, but it was not built in the same way as Assyria. The Medes did not focus on fear and destruction. Instead, they worked to balance central power with local customs. They allowed different regions to keep their own languages, beliefs, and leaders, so long as they remained loyal. This system of local autonomy became a model that later empires, especially the Persians, would follow. Despite their growing power, the Medes left behind few monuments. We have no long inscriptions in their language, no grand statues of their kings. Much of what we know comes from outside sources, mainly Babylonian records, and Greek historians like Herodotus. This makes them mysterious. We see their actions, but not their words. We know their impact, but not their voices. One of the few glimpses we get is the city of Ecbatana. It became their capital. Ancient writers described it as beautiful and grand. Some said it had 7 walls, each a different color: white, black, red, blue, orange, silver, and gold. Whether this was true or just a legend, we may never know. But it suggests the Medes were not only warriors, but builders and dreamers too. The unification under Cyaxares and the fall of Nineveh marked a turning point in Middle Eastern history. For the first time, an Iranian people had stood toe-to-toe with the great empires of Mesopotamia and won. They were no longer just hill tribes. They were rulers of an empire. This victory opened the door for what would come next. The Medes didn't rule forever. In less than a century, they would be overtaken by another group, the Persians. But their achievement remained. They had shown that unity among diverse tribes could create great strength. They had laid the foundation for the empires that followed. and they had ended one of the cruelest regimes the world had ever seen. Cyaxares, the man who brought the tribes together, is not as famous today as Cyrus or Darius. His name does not appear on monuments, but without him, the story of Persia might never have begun. He was the spark that lit the fire. He was the first to show that the Iranian plateau could produce empire builders, not just survivors. And by leading his people to victory over Nineveh, he changed history forever. Cyrus the Great was not born into greatness. He earned it. Born to a Persian father and a Median mother, he stood at the crossroads of two powerful cultures. At first, he was just a tribal leader, a figure among many in the shifting landscape of ancient Iran. But Cyrus had something others did not, a vision of unity, a gift for strategy, and a sense of justice. When he rose up against his grandfather, the last Median king, it wasn't simply a rebellion. It was the beginning of one of history's most remarkable empires. Unlike conquerors who burned cities and erased cultures, Cyrus built through inclusion. After defeating the Medes, he didn't destroy their institutions. He used them. He welcomed their nobles. He merged their traditions into his own. In doing so, he created something new, a hybrid empire that brought people together rather than tearing them apart. This became the model for all Persian rule to come. His first major test came in the west. The kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the wealthy and powerful King Croesus, attacked Persian lands. Croesus believed the young Persian state was fragile, but Cyrus moved swiftly. He crossed rivers, battled in winter, and surrounded the Lydian capital Sardis. Victory came quickly, and with it, the Persians gained not only gold, but access to the Aegean coast and the Greek cities of Anatolia. Cyrus didn't stop there. His most famous conquest was Babylon, the ancient center of Mesopotamian civilization. Other rulers might have marched in with fire and fury. Cyrus did not. He respected Babylon's gods. He honored its temples. He even claimed to have been chosen by Marduk, the city's main deity, to restore peace. The gates opened without a fight. The people welcomed him as a liberator. It was after this triumph that Cyrus made one of his most lasting marks. He issued a decree inscribed on a clay cylinder that outlined his policies. He declared religious freedom for all. He allowed displaced peoples to return to their homes. Among them were the Jews exiled in Babylon for decades. Cyrus let them go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. For this, the Hebrew Bible remembers him not as a conqueror, but as a savior. He is the only non-Jewish figure ever called Messiah in their scripture. This cylinder, now known as the Cyrus cylinder, is often called the first declaration of human rights. Whether or not that's technically true, its spirit is clear. Cyrus saw empire not as domination, but as stewardship. He didn't try to erase differences. He embraced them. He believed that when people were free to live by their own beliefs, they would become more loyal, not less. It was a revolutionary idea for the ancient world. To manage his growing empire, Cyrus created a new system. He divided the territory into provinces. Each was governed by a local official, often from that region. These governors or satraps reported to Cyrus but had room to manage local affairs. This balance between central control and local autonomy helped keep the empire stable. It was both efficient and respectful. People could keep their languages, their gods, and their customs, as long as they paid taxes and kept the peace. Cyrus also built his capital at Pasargadae. It wasn't the grandest city, but it had meaning. His tomb there remains a symbol of Persian identity. It's a modest structure, a simple stone building on a raised platform. No towering statues, no gold-plated ceilings. Just strength, simplicity, and silence. Alexander the Great, centuries later, would visit this tomb and order it protected. Even he, the conqueror of Persia, paid his respects to Cyrus. What made Cyrus different was not just his military skill, though he had plenty of that. It was his attitude. He saw power as a responsibility. He listened to the people he ruled. He didn't try to make everyone the same. He knew that diversity was strength. In a time when most empires ruled through fear, Cyrus ruled through respect. This philosophy left a deep mark. Later, Persian rulers followed his model. The satrapy system remained. Religious tolerance continued. Multiculturalism was not just accepted, it was official policy. This made Persia a safe haven for many. Traders, scholars, and refugees came from across the world. The empire became not just a political force, but a cultural bridge between civilizations. Cyrus died during a campaign in Central Asia. The exact details are unclear. Some say he fell in battle. Others say he was ambushed. But no matter the cause, his death marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a much larger story. His successors would build on what he created. Some would follow his ideals. Others would forget them. But the foundation he laid remained strong. In the modern world, Cyrus is still remembered. In Iran, his tomb is a place of national pride. Around the world, his name is associated with fairness, wisdom, and vision. His legacy goes far beyond borders. The idea that an empire can be both powerful and just, that strength comes from inclusion, continues to inspire. Cyrus the Great forged an empire unlike any before it. One that stretched across continents, welcomed many peoples, and endured for centuries. He showed the world a new path. Not of forced unity, but of respectful rule. Not of conquest alone, but of cooperation. In doing so, he didn't just shape Persia, he helped shape the very idea of what civilization could be. Darius was not born to be king. His rise came through ambition, clever strategy, and bold action. When Cyrus the Great died, his son Cambyses took the throne. But after Cambyses died under mysterious circumstances, a crisis followed. A man claimed to be Cyrus's other son, but many believed he was an impostor. Darius, a distant relative and army officer, stepped in. He fought off challengers and secured the crown. Some saw him as a usurper. But once he had power, Darius proved he was no ordinary ruler. He didn't just want to keep the empire together. He wanted to strengthen it, expand it, and organize it better than ever before. He understood that a kingdom this vast, stretching from Egypt to India, needed more than soldiers and gold. It needed structure. So he built it. One of his greatest achievements was refining the satrapy system. Cyrus had created it. Darius improved it. He divided the empire into around 20 provinces. Each was called a satrapy. Each had a governor or satrap appointed to collect taxes, enforce laws, and maintain order. But Darius didn't stop there. He added more layers of control. Alongside each satrap, he appointed a military commander and a royal secretary. These officials didn't answer to the satrap, they answered to the king. That way, no one man could become too powerful in one region. Darius also created a team of royal inspectors. They traveled from province to province, secretly, watching, listening, reporting back to the capital. They were known as the eyes and ears of the king. Their job was simple: to make sure no one was cheating the system. With this, Darius built a network of control that reached into every corner of the empire. But control alone wasn't enough. The empire also needed movement of goods, armies, and ideas. So Darius built roads. The most famous was the Royal Road. It stretched over 2,500 kilometers from the city of Sardis in the west to Susa in the east. Along the way, he set up relay stations every 25 kilometers. At each station, fresh horses and riders waited. Messages could travel the entire route in just a week. What took a traveler 3 months, royal couriers could do in days. It was one of the ancient world's greatest communication systems. Darius also introduced a unified currency. He minted gold coins called darics and silver coins called sigloi. These coins could be used across the empire. Before this, different regions had different currencies. Trade was messy. Now a merchant in Egypt could sell goods in India and get paid in the same coin. This created a connected economy. Farmers, artisans, and traders all benefited. Taxes could be paid more easily. Markets grew. To make sure weights and measures were consistent, Darius standardized those too. No more guessing how much a bushel of grain should weigh. No more disputes over what a yard or a cubit meant. Across the empire, one standard system applied. It was a massive step toward unity. As his government grew, Darius needed a new center of power. He chose a rocky plain near the Zagros Mountains. There he built a new capital, Persepolis. It wasn't just a city. It was a statement. A platform of stone carved into the mountain base. Grand staircases, massive columns, halls filled with images of people from all over the empire. Delegations from distant lands carved in stone bringing gifts to the king. Egyptians, Indians, Scythians, Lydians, all united under one roof. It was a visual map of power carved for eternity. Darius didn't just rule with stone and metal. He ruled with stories. He had one carved into a cliff face in western Iran. It was called the Behistun inscription. It showed him with his foot on a rebel's chest, 9 other rebels tied before him. Around them, words told the story of his rise to power in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Centuries later, this carving would help scholars unlock the mystery of cuneiform writing, just like the Rosetta Stone helped with Egyptian hieroglyphs. Darius was also a builder of temples and palaces. He respected local customs and gods. In Egypt, he supported the temples of ancient deities. In Babylon, he followed traditions to honor Marduk. But he also promoted Ahura Mazda, the chief god of the Persian religion. He saw himself as chosen by this god to bring order to the world, not through destruction, but through law. That law became one of Darius's most important legacies. He organized legal systems in different provinces. He allowed local laws to remain, but added oversight to ensure fairness. People could appeal decisions. The king stood as the final judge. In doing this, Darius planted early seeds of imperial justice. His military was vast. It included soldiers from every part of the empire: Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Indians, Bactrians, Ethiopians. Each group brought their own weapons and fighting styles. Darius used this diversity as strength. He didn't try to make everyone the same. He used what each culture did best. But not all of Darius's campaigns succeeded. He attempted to conquer the Scythians' fierce horsemen in the north. The campaign ended with no clear victory. Later, he tried to punish Greek cities that had supported rebellion in Ionia. This led to the famous Battle of Marathon, where his forces were defeated by the Athenians. It was a small battle for Persia, but a huge moment for Greek pride. Still, Darius left behind a powerful legacy. He transformed the empire into a machine that could govern, trade, communicate, and endure. His systems lasted long after he died. Rome studied them. Even modern states would echo his ideas: separation of powers, reliable roads, national currency, and inspection systems. Darius died before he could fully crush the Greek resistance. That mission would fall to his son Xerxes. But Darius's mark on history was already carved deep, in stone and policy and in memory. He was not just a ruler. He was an architect of empire. Xerxes was the son of Darius. He inherited not only the throne but also unfinished business. His father had tried to bring the rebellious Greeks under Persian control and failed. Now it was Xerxes' turn. He prepared for war on a scale the world had never seen. For 4 long years, he gathered men-built ships and secured supplies. He called soldiers from every corner of the empire, from Egypt, from Babylon, from India, from the mountains and deserts of Persia. The army grew enormous. Some ancient writers claimed it was over 1 million strong. Modern historians say it was smaller. But even the most cautious estimates describe the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. Xerxes was determined. He would punish the Greeks for their defiance, and he would make the empire's western edge secure. To do that, he needed to cross from Asia into Europe. A narrow stretch of water, the Hellespont, stood in his way. He ordered engineers to build a massive bridge of ships. They lashed hundreds of vessels together with rope and laid wooden planks across them. But a storm destroyed the bridge. Furious Xerxes is said to have ordered the sea whipped with chains. He had his engineers executed. Then he ordered the bridge rebuilt. This time it held. The Persian army crossed into Europe. As the army moved through Greece, many cities surrendered. They offered earth and water, the symbols of submission. But not all. 2 city-states refused: Athens and Sparta. They stood their ground. Sparta was known for its warriors, Athens for its fleets and thinkers. They formed an alliance, and they prepared to fight. The first great battle came at a narrow pass called Thermopylae. There, a small Greek force led by 300 Spartans held off the massive Persian army for 3 days. They blocked the pass using the terrain to neutralize Persian numbers. In the end, they were outflanked and defeated. But their stand became legend, a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. Even Xerxes had to respect their bravery. With the path to southern Greece open, Xerxes marched toward Athens. The city had been evacuated. Most people had fled to nearby islands. The Persians entered the city and set it on fire. Temples, homes, and public buildings were reduced to ash. For Xerxes, it was revenge, a message. He had burned the heart of Greece. But the war was not over. The real challenge came at sea. The Persian fleet, hundreds of ships strong, met the Greek navy in a narrow strait near the island of Salamis. The Persian ships were large and heavy, powerful but less nimble. The Greeks had smaller, faster vessels. They used the narrow space to their advantage. As the battle began, Greek ships darted between Persian hulls. They rammed and boarded. Chaos spread through the Persian fleet. Xerxes watched from a golden throne set up on a nearby hill. What he saw shocked him. One by one, his ships were destroyed. The Persian navy was crushed. This loss changed everything. Xerxes still had a large army in Greece. But without control of the sea, supply lines were at risk. He decided to return to Asia, leaving a general behind to continue the campaign. But the tide had turned. The following year, the remaining Persian forces were defeated at the Battle of Plataea. Greece was no longer in danger of conquest. Back in Persia, Xerxes focused on building. He expanded his father's work at Persepolis. He built new halls, gates, and sculptures. The Gate of All Nations was completed under his rule. It welcomed visitors from across the empire. Columns stood tall, carved with bulls and lions. The reliefs showed people bringing gifts to the king. The art celebrated unity and power. Yet all was not well. Xerxes' reign began to show cracks. Court intrigues grew. Assassinations and conspiracies appeared. Eventually, he was killed in his own palace by members of his guard. His death marked the beginning of a slow decline. The empire remained vast and wealthy, but internal problems had begun to spread. The Greek wars are often remembered as the moment Persia met its match. But in truth, they were a small part of a much bigger story. The empire stretched across continents. It absorbed cultures, managed trade, and built infrastructure. A loss in Greece did not end Persian greatness. Still, the battles at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea entered legend. And in those legends, Xerxes was often cast as the villain, a proud king brought down by free men. Yet the real Xerxes was more complicated. He ruled for over 2 decades. He improved the empire's cities. He protected religious traditions. He faced one of the most determined enemies in history and came close to victory. His ambition was bold. His resources were massive. His failure came not from weakness, but from underestimating a small group of stubborn, determined people fighting on their home soil. In many ways, Xerxes' campaign showed the limits of empire. You can conquer land. You can burn cities. But you cannot always break spirit. The Greeks kept fighting. They remembered the flames of Athens, and centuries later they would come east under Alexander and take Persia in return. But that is another chapter. For now, Xerxes remains a towering figure. His buildings still rise. His name still echoes in stone. He burned Athens. He faced the sea. And at Salamis he learned that even an emperor must respect the wind, the tide, and the will of a free people. By the time Alexander the Great turned his eyes east, Persia was still one of the largest empires on earth. It stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. It had gold cities, armies, and tradition. But it also had weaknesses, internal struggles, rebellious provinces, and a king, Darius III, who lacked the strength of his ancestors. Alexander saw opportunity. He was just 22 years old when he crossed into Persian territory. Behind him stood an army trained in new tactics, loyal to the core and hungry for victory. Ahead of him lay a challenge unlike any he had faced before. His campaign began with fire and steel. At the Battle of Granicus, he charged across a river and broke the Persian line. It was a message. He was not afraid of the great empire. At Issus, he faced Darius himself. The Persian army was larger, but Alexander used the terrain wisely. He struck hard at the center. Darius fled. The king's family, his mother, wife, and daughters were left behind. Alexander treated them with honor. He called the queen mother, respected their status, and ensured their safety. This won him praise even from Persians. As he moved through the empire, Alexander was struck by its grandeur. He saw cities that rivaled those of Greece, palaces filled with art libraries and gold, temples where gods had been worshipped for centuries. But instead of destroying, he adapted. He began to wear Persian clothes. He adopted court customs, long robes, formal rituals, and even bowed greetings. This shocked his Greek soldiers. Many believed he was turning into an Eastern king. But Alexander had a plan. He didn't just want to conquer Persia. He wanted to become Persia. He made a point of visiting the tomb of Cyrus the Great. In a quiet valley near the ruins of Pasargadae, he stood before the stone tomb. The man inside had once ruled the world, and now a new king came to pay respect. When Alexander found the tomb desecrated, he ordered it restored. Guards were placed around it. Priests were told to resume rituals. To Alexander, Cyrus was a model ruler. A king who united people, not divided them. A king who led with respect. Alexander wanted to follow that example. In Babylon, he took over without a fight. The priests welcomed him. He offered sacrifices to the local gods. He spoke kindly of Marduk, the great deity of the city. He gave funds to temples. This wasn't flattery. It was strategy. Alexander understood that legitimacy came not from fear alone, but from acceptance, and religion was key to acceptance. In Susa, another Persian capital, he did something no Greek king had ever done. He held a mass wedding. He married a Persian noblewoman. Then he had 90 of his officers do the same. Greek men, Persian brides. The goal was clear: to blend the two worlds into one, not as master and subject, but as family. Bloodlines crossed. Children born of these unions would belong to both East and West. But not all accepted this vision. Many of Alexander's Greek commanders hated these changes. They whispered of betrayal, of lost identity. Some left his court. Others plotted in secret. Alexander, though, did not stop. He pushed farther east, into Central Asia, into the lands beyond the Oxus. Each victory brought more people, more customs, more layers to his dream of empire. He introduced Persian officials into his administration, taught Greek to young nobles, sponsored mixed schools. In his court, a Persian and a Greek could debate philosophy, plan roads, or advise the king. It was a melting pot long before that term existed, a court not defined by race but by talent and loyalty. Yet the dream was fragile. While Alexander blended cultures, tensions simmered. Some Persians saw him as an outsider. Some Greeks saw him as a traitor. He tried to walk both roads, but no man can walk in two worlds forever. At Persepolis, the grand Persian capital, that tension exploded. After taking the city, Alexander allowed his troops to plunder. Gold jewels art all carried off. Then, during a drunken feast, the palace was set on fire. Some say it was revenge for Athens burned by Xerxes a century before. Others say it was a mistake, a moment of madness. But the flames rose high. Columns collapsed. Paintings curled into ash. The city built by Darius and expanded by Xerxes was gone. Alexander wept the next morning. He tried to stop the destruction, but it was too late. Still, even as Persepolis burned, Alexander's connection to Persia grew deeper. He no longer saw himself as just Macedonian. He called himself King of Asia. He began to speak of a global empire, one where East and West were no longer separate, one language, one coin, one people. But destiny would not give him enough time. In Babylon, in the heat of summer, Alexander fell ill. Fever gripped him. His body failed. At just 32 years old, the most powerful man in the world died. His generals asked who should rule. His answer was vague. To the strongest, he whispered. After his death, his empire broke apart. His generals carved it into pieces. Persia became part of the Seleucid realm, a Greek dynasty ruling eastern lands. But the memory of Alexander endured, not as a conqueror alone, but as a student of Persia, a man who saw greatness in the civilization he had defeated, who honored its kings, learned its ways, and dreamed of unity. Alexander conquered Persia. But Persia also changed him. In the end, he did not destroy the empire. He carried it forward in new forms, with new faces and new hopes. His story is not just about victory. It is about transformation. And the echoes of that transformation still ripple through time. When Alexander died, his empire shattered. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought for control. One of them, Seleucus, eventually took the eastern part, including Persia. He founded a new dynasty called the Seleucids. These rulers were Greek in language, style, and belief. They brought with them the culture of the Hellenistic world. Greek temples, theaters, marketplaces, and gymnasiums appeared in Persian cities. Statues of Apollo and Athena replaced those of Ahura Mazda. Greek became the language of government law and education. On the surface, it seemed like Persia was becoming Greek. The Seleucids built new cities to spread their culture. One of the most important was Seleucia on the Tigris, not far from ancient Babylon. It had wide streets, stone buildings, and a layout based on Greek ideals. In its schools, boys read Homer. In its theaters, citizens watched tragedies and comedies from Athens. Greek coins, Greek laws, and Greek gods filled the city. For the urban elite, this was a new golden age. But outside the city walls, things looked very different. In the countryside, Persian traditions held strong. Farmers still spoke their native languages. They prayed at old fire temples. They celebrated ancient holidays like Nowruz and Mehregan. Zoroastrian priests continued their rituals in small villages and mountain shrines. The Greek rulers rarely reached these areas. They didn't speak the local dialects. They didn't understand the customs, and in many cases, they didn't try. As a result, the rural zones became safe havens for Persian identity. This created a split society. In cities like Ecbatana or Seleucia, the elite followed Greek fashion. They wore togas, studied philosophy, and held Greek-style banquets. In the villages, people wore traditional clothes, told Persian stories, and kept the old calendar. Over time, a kind of dual culture emerged. The two worlds existed side by side, often unaware of each other, or worse, suspicious of each other. Still, the Seleucids were not just conquerors. They were also administrators. They understood that to rule effectively, they had to compromise. So in some places, they allowed Persian customs to continue. They adopted certain symbols. They even offered gifts to Persian temples. Some kings appeared in Persian robes on Eastern coins. Others visited sacred sites to win favor from the local population. This wasn't love. It was strategy. But it helped keep the peace. The Seleucids faced many problems. Their empire was too big. It stretched from Turkey to Afghanistan. Communication was slow. Rebellions were common. And other powers were rising. In the east, the Indian-Mauryan Empire pushed at the borders. In the west, the Ptolemies of Egypt challenged their power. Internally, too, there were civil wars and rival claimants. Slowly, the empire weakened. As the Seleucids declined, new groups rose. In the far northeast, the Parthians began to take land. They were Iranian, like the old Persians. They knew the terrain. They spoke the languages. They respected Zoroastrian priests. Bit by bit, they pushed the Seleucids back. In time, they would claim the legacy of Persia as their own. But even before the Parthians, Persian culture had begun to reassert itself. Writers started using Persian words again. Artists combined Greek techniques with Persian themes. Pottery, jewelry, and fabrics began to reflect local tastes. Persian myths reappeared in literature and oral traditions. Though Greek remained the official language, people remembered who they were. One sign of this resistance was religion. The Seleucids promoted Greek gods, but the people held on to their own beliefs. Fire temples continued to burn. The sacred flame was never allowed to die. Priests trained new generations. Families passed on prayers and rituals. Zoroastrianism was more than religion, it was identity. And that identity did not fade. There was also quiet resistance in daily life. In private homes, people ate Persian food, followed Persian customs, and arranged their houses in traditional styles. They named their children after ancient heroes. They told stories of Cyrus and Darius. These choices, small and personal, were acts of survival. They kept a culture alive beneath the surface of foreign rule. The Seleucid Empire never fully conquered Persian hearts. It changed the cities, yes, but not the soul of the land. The deep valleys, the mountain villages, the desert oases, they remained Persian. And when the time came, they provided the foundation for a revival. The memory of past glory was not erased. It was buried, waiting. This period reminds us that conquest is not the same as control. You can change the capital, You can print new coins, you can build foreign statues, but you cannot force people to forget who they are. In Persia, culture lived in whispers, in prayers, in the silence of old temples, and the laughter of village feasts. So while the Seleucids ruled with Greek laws and Greek words, the Persian story continued underground. And when the next wave of Iranian rulers rose, they would find that the roots of their culture had never truly been cut. The Parthians came from the northeast, from the lands of rugged hills and wide plains. They were not city builders like the Greeks. They were horsemen, warriors of the steppe. Their roots were nomadic, and their culture prized speed, mobility, and honor. Around the middle of the 3rd century BCE, they began to rise. At first, they were just one tribe among many, but under a leader named Arsaces, they broke free from Seleucid control and built a new kingdom. That kingdom grew slowly but surely into a new Iranian empire. The Parthians didn't just take land. They revived something older, an Iranian spirit of resistance and rule. They reconnected with Zoroastrian traditions. They brought back Persian-style administration, and they did it all with a military system built for their world. Their most famous warriors were the cataphracts, heavy cavalry, both horse and rider covered in armor. They carried long lances and charged with terrifying force. Alongside them rode horse archers, fast, deadly, and cunning. These archers used a special technique, the Parthian shot. They would pretend to flee, twist in the saddle, and fire arrows backward as they galloped away. Enemies who chased them often rode straight into death. The Parthian army was hard to pin down. They didn't rely on roads or walls. They relied on horses, scouting, and terrain. They knew their homeland well. Invaders from the west, like the Romans, found it hard to win. The Parthians used open fields, deserts, and rivers as natural allies. They avoided direct confrontation unless it suited them. This gave them a defensive advantage, and when they attacked, it was swift and overwhelming. One of their greatest victories came in 53 BCE at the Battle of Carrhae. A Roman army led by Crassus marched into Parthian territory. He expected an easy win. He was wrong. The Parthians surrounded the Roman legions. Their horse archers rained arrows without pause. The Romans formed tight ranks, shields locked, but it didn't help. Then the cataphracts charged. Crassus was killed. Over 20,000 Romans died. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. The Parthians took the Roman battle standards, eagles made of gold, and displayed them as trophies. This victory shocked the world. A new power had arrived, and it was not Greek, not Roman. It was Iranian. But the Parthians didn't want to conquer Rome. They wanted to defend their lands and grow their influence eastward. They built their empire carefully, using alliances, marriages, and trade. Their capital was Ctesiphon, near the Tigris River. It wasn't as grand as Persepolis, but it was well placed. From there, they controlled trade routes, linking the Mediterranean to India and China. Silk, spices, gems, and gold passed through their markets. Diplomats from the Han dynasty of China wrote about the Yangtze people, almost certainly the Parthians who traded across vast distances. The Parthians became key players in the early Silk Road network. Their government wasn't centralized like Darius's old model. The Parthian king ruled with the support of powerful noble families. These families held their own lands, raised their own armies, and often had their own agendas. This made the empire flexible but also fragile. Succession crises were common. When a king died, nobles often fought over the next ruler. Civil wars erupted. Yet despite the chaos, the system worked. It lasted nearly 500 years. Religion played an important role. The Parthians supported Zoroastrianism, but they didn't enforce it. Other faiths, Greek, Babylonian, Jewish, and even early Christian, were tolerated. This tolerance made the empire stable and diverse. It also helped trade flourish. Merchants from many lands felt safe traveling through Parthian territory. Culturally, the Parthians blended influences. Their coins showed Greek letters but Persian symbols. Their kings wore Persian robes, but followed Greek artistic styles. Their palaces mixed Iranian floor plans with Hellenistic decorations. In art, they developed a distinctive frontal-style portraits, showing figures looking straight ahead, a break from classical side profiles. This style would influence later Persian and Islamic art. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Parthian culture was its diplomacy. They knew when to fight. But more often, they preferred negotiation. They signed treaties with Rome. They exchanged hostages. They made deals. They understood that war was costly and power could be gained without bloodshed. In many ways, the Parthians acted as a bridge between East and West, between old and new. They preserved Iranian traditions while adapting to a changing world. They didn't seek to dominate everything. They sought balance. Even in their decline, they left a path forward. In the early 3rd century CE, a new Persian dynasty rose, the Sasanians. They would claim descent from noble families who served the Parthians. They would build a stronger, more centralized state. But they would also inherit the Parthians' legacy, their art, their military style, and their love of horsemen. So while the Parthians may not have built towering monuments or written epic poetry, they built something harder to see: resilience. They restored Iranian power when it was almost lost. They reminded the world that Persia was not gone, just changing, waiting, galloping forward with arrow and lance and watching every move from horseback. The fall of the Parthians opened the door to a new era. Around the year 224 CE, a powerful figure named Ardashir rose from the southern region of Persia. He came from a priestly family connected to ancient fire temples. But he was more than a religious man. He was a warrior. He defeated the last Parthian king in battle and declared a new dynasty, the Sasanian Empire. This would become the last great pre-Islamic empire of Iran. Under the Sasanians, Persian power, culture, and religion were reborn. Ardashir didn't want to rule like the Parthians. He wanted a strong center. One king, one law, one religion. He built a tightly controlled government with the king at its top. Local nobles still held influence, but they answered to the crown. Taxes were better organized. Cities were more carefully managed. Records were kept. The days of loose rule were over. Persia was now a centralized empire again, like it had been under Darius many centuries before. Religion was at the heart of the new state. The Sasanians made Zoroastrianism the official religion. Temples were restored. Priests gained authority. Holy fires were tended with care. The empire promoted a version of the faith that tied it directly to royal power. The king was not just a ruler, he was chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. Together, throne and altar formed the pillars of the empire. This connection between religion and government shaped everything. Laws reflected Zoroastrian ideas of purity, order, and moral duty. Marriage property and even burial customs were guided by sacred texts. Priests served as judges and advisors. They sat in courtrooms. They walked palace halls. Their words carried weight. The Sasanians also looked to the past. They claimed descent from the Achaemenids. Ardashir carved his victory scenes beside the cliffs of Persepolis. He wanted people to see him as the heir of Cyrus and Darius. His son Shapur I continued this idea. He called himself King of Kings of Iran and non-Iran. His goal was clear: to restore Persian greatness. And he did. Shapur launched bold military campaigns. He pushed west into Roman territory. He captured cities. He even captured a Roman emperor, Valerian. The image of Shapur on horseback with the emperor kneeling before him was carved into rock and remains today. It sent a message: Rome could be beaten. This clash between Persia and Rome would continue for centuries. The two empires fought many times, sometimes over Armenia, sometimes over Mesopotamia, sometimes for honor alone. Neither side could fully defeat the other. But their rivalry defined the politics of the ancient world. When one side was weak, the other struck. When both were strong, uneasy peace returned. In between wars, the Sasanian Empire focused on culture. Cities were built or rebuilt. Roads and canals helped trade. Craftsmen produced fine silverwork plates, cups, and ornaments showing kings hunting lions or celebrating victories. These items became famous across the ancient world. Persian textiles and carpets were exported far and wide. Even the game of chess, some believe, was refined in Sasanian courts. Education and science flourished too. The Academy of Gundashapur became a major center of learning. It had a hospital, a library, and scholars from many lands. Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge came together. Medicine, astronomy, philosophy, they all grew here. The city became a bridge between civilizations, a place where ideas met and mingled. Art and architecture reached new heights. Sasanian buildings featured great domes, grand arches, and thick walls. The famous Tak Kasra, a massive vaulted hall in Ctesiphon, still stands in ruins today. It shows the scale and ambition of the empire. Palaces were decorated with stucco and stone reliefs. Fire temples rose in cities and rural towns alike. The army was strong, centered around elite cavalry called the Savaran. These knights wore armor and rode powerful horses. They trained from youth and came from noble families. Their loyalty to the king was essential. In time, their style of warfare would influence both Byzantium and medieval Europe. But power brought challenges. The centralized system made rebellions dangerous. If the king was weak, the whole structure shook. Religious minorities sometimes faced pressure. Jews, Christians, and others were allowed to live and worship, but with limits. In times of conflict, they were seen as threats. Despite these tensions, the Sasanian Empire endured. It remained a great power for over 400 years. Its culture shaped the world around it. Its model of kingship influenced Islamic rule. Its symbols, stories, and traditions survived even after its fall. The Sasanians gave Persia its last imperial moment before the rise of Islam. They revived ancient glory, reimagined religion, and stood firm against Rome. Their story is one of ambition, belief, and resilience. They stood between East and West and left a legacy that neither sword nor time could erase. The 7th century brought a storm to Persia. A new force was rising from the deserts of Arabia. United by faith and fire, the Arab-Muslim armies moved fast. Town after town fell before them. But this was not just a military campaign. It was a transformation. One that would end an empire and replace it with something new, a theocracy guided by the teachings of Islam. At first, the Sasanian Empire didn't see the danger. It had just finished a long and bloody war with the Byzantine Empire. Cities were ruined. Treasuries were empty. Armies were tired. The last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, was young and inexperienced. He lacked the strength to unite the nobles. The empire was already cracking. Then the Arabs attacked. The first major battle came at Qadisiyah near the Euphrates River. The Persian army brought war elephants and heavy cavalry. The Arabs came with speed, unity, and belief. The battle lasted for days. A sandstorm turned the sky red. Persian lines broke. Their general Rostam was killed. The Arab army marched forward. Soon the great city of Ctesiphon fell. The palace of the Sasanian kings was abandoned. Gold, silk, and jewels were taken. The empire had lost its heart. Another battle followed at Nahavand. It was called the Victory of Victories. The Persian army tried one last stand, but it was crushed. After that, resistance scattered. Yazdegerd fled east, hoping for help from allies. None came. Years later, he was killed by a miller while in hiding. The line of Persian kings, stretching back over 2,000 years, came to an end. But conquest did not mean destruction. Cities were not always burned. People were not all enslaved. The Arabs wanted to govern. They offered terms. If cities surrendered, they were spared. They had to pay a tax, the jizya, and accept Muslim rule. In exchange, they could keep their homes, their businesses, and their faiths. At first, most Persians did not convert. Islam spread slowly, first in towns, later in villages. For many years, Zoroastrians remained the majority. Fire temples stayed open. Priests still taught their texts. But the world was changing. Arabic became the language of power. Muslim leaders replaced royal governors. Laws shifted. Public rituals changed. The calendar reset. And little by little, Persia transformed. The biggest change was in leadership. The monarchy was gone. In its place rose a new form of authority, one based on religion. The caliph, or successor to the Prophet Muhammad, was both a political and spiritual leader. He ruled from Medina, then Damascus, and later Baghdad. His orders carried the weight of divine law. Scholars and jurists interpreted Islamic teachings. Mosques became centers of power. Persia was no longer ruled by kings. It was ruled by faith. This change brought both disruption and continuity. On the surface, everything was different. New rulers, new laws, new customs. But beneath the surface, much remained. Persian bureaucrats served the caliphs. Persian engineers built canals. Persian doctors treated patients. Even the taxation system kept many features from Sasanian times. The Arab conquerors quickly learned that Persian administration worked. Over time, more Persians embraced Islam. Some converted for faith, others for opportunity. Muslims paid fewer taxes. They could rise in government. They gained social status. But conversion was not forced. It came in waves. By the end of the 8th century, the majority of Persians were Muslim. Yet even as they accepted the new faith, they reshaped it. Persian culture did not vanish. It adapted. Poets wrote verses in Arabic, but with Persian themes. Artists painted Islamic scenes with Persian colors. Scholars brought ancient wisdom into Islamic law and science. This fusion gave birth to a new identity, Persian Islam. Zoroastrianism declined but did not disappear. Some fire temples remained, others were hidden. Some Zoroastrians fled east to India. There they became known as Parsis. They kept their faith alive in new lands. In Iran, small communities endured. Today, their descendants still light sacred fires, keeping ancient traditions burning. Meanwhile, Islamic Persia grew into a center of learning and culture. Cities like Nishapur-Ray and Isfahan flourished again. New leaders rose, some Arab, some Persian. The old dynasties were gone, but the land remained strong. It adjusted to the new world without forgetting its past. The conquest was not just a change of rulers. It was a transformation of identity. Persia became part of a vast Islamic world stretching from Spain to India. Yet it remained unique. Its language survived. Its memories lingered. Its dreams continued. The fall of the Sasanian Empire ended one chapter, but began another. A chapter filled with change, resilience, and rebirth. Persia had fallen to the sword, but its soul was not broken. It learned to bend, not break, to absorb, not vanish. And from this new mix, something powerful emerged, a civilization both Islamic and Persian, faithful and proud. The Abbasid Caliphate rose with the help of Persia. In 750 CE, after years of discontent under the Umayyads, a revolution began in the eastern province of Khorasan. Their many Persians had grown frustrated. Though they had accepted Islam, they were still treated as second class. They paid taxes. They were excluded from high office. They were called converts, not equals. So when a movement promised change, they joined. A man named Abu Muslim, a Persian with charisma and vision, led the uprising. His forces swept west. The Umayyad rulers were defeated. A new dynasty began. The Abbasids. From the start, the Abbasids positioned themselves differently. They claimed to be the true heirs of Islam, but they also embraced Persian support. Their new capital, Baghdad, was built near ancient Ctesiphon. This was no accident. It was a message. The center of Islam had moved east, closer to Persia, closer to the heart of an older civilization. Baghdad became a city of wonder. It was planned with care, round in design, filled with markets, libraries, gardens, and mosques. Scholars called it the jewel of the world. From this city the caliphs ruled, but behind the scenes many officials were Persian. They brought with them centuries of administrative knowledge, the postal system, the tax records, the land registries. These were based on Sasanian models. They worked, and the Abbasids kept them. At court, Persian customs returned. Ceremonies were more formal, robes were longer, thrones were higher. Language shifted too. Arabic remained the language of religion and law. But Persian ideas, stories, and styles flowed into daily life. Ministers like the Barmakid family, originally from Buddhist temples in Balkh, rose to great power. They sponsored science, poetry, and translation. A golden age followed. Knowledge blossomed. The Abbasids built a great library, the House of Wisdom. Inside, scholars translated works from Greek Sanskrit and Middle Persian into Arabic. They studied astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Persian thinkers played a central role. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra. His name gave us the word algorithm. Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, wrote medical texts that were used in Europe for centuries. Though they wrote in Arabic, their roots were deeply Persian. Persian literature also began to rise again. At first it was oral, songs, stories, poems passed by memory. But gradually, New Persian Farsi returned as a written language. It used Arabic script, but its grammar came from ancient tongues. Poets began to write in this language. Their verses spoke of love loss, fate, and faith. They built a new identity, Muslim and Persian fused but proud. This cultural revival was not just about art, it was political. By reviving the Persian language and celebrating Persian history, people asserted who they were. They could be faithful Muslims without forgetting their past. Kings began to sponsor works that blended Islamic themes with Persian legends. This would lead one day to the creation of the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Meanwhile, Abbasid Persia remained a place of learning. Cities like Nishapur Rai and Bukhara thrived. Libraries expanded. Hospitals grew. Schools taught boys logic, grammar, and law. Scientists built observatories. Physicians wrote detailed manuals. The caliphs supported this work, but so did local governors and merchants. There was a hunger for knowledge, a belief that faith and reason could work together. Religion also evolved. The Abbasids supported Sunni Islam, but they allowed debate. Theology developed. Sufism spread, offering a mystical path to God. Persian lands became home to famous Sufi poets and teachers. Their writings, full of metaphor and wisdom, would inspire generations. Despite this progress, tensions remained. Not all groups were treated equally. Shia Muslims in particular faced challenges. Some Persian movements resisted Abbasid control. Local dynasties rose. They pledged loyalty to the caliph, but ruled independently. Yet even these rulers adopted Abbasid styles. They built mosques, minted coins, and quoted Islamic texts. Islam had taken root, but so had Persian pride. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Persian dynasties like the Samanids began to dominate the East. They still honored the caliph, but they made Farsi the official language. They sponsored Persian art. They collected legends of ancient kings. The Abbasid system allowed this flexibility. It was a blend, not a mold. What made this era special was its openness. Baghdad welcomed scholars from everywhere. Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and Muslims debated under the same roof. A Persian doctor might treat a Christian merchant using Greek medicine translated in Arabic. A Hindu number system might help a Muslim mathematician predict a lunar eclipse. The walls between cultures grew thinner. In the end, the Abbasids changed Persia, but Persia changed them too. Their court became Persian in style. Their laws borrowed Persian order. Their culture absorbed Persian depth. It was not conquest. It was collaboration. From it, a golden age emerged, one that shaped science, art, and belief for centuries. In the northeastern frontier of the Islamic world, a new dynasty began to rise. It started quietly under the banner of the Abbasid caliphs, but it soon grew into something far greater. The Samanids were a Persian dynasty ruling from Bukhara and Samarkand. Though loyal to the caliph in name, they were independent in practice. More importantly, they saw themselves as guardians of Persian culture. Under their rule, something remarkable happened. The Persian language, nearly lost after the Arab conquest, was reborn. For centuries, Persian had been spoken in homes and markets. But Arabic had become the language of government, religion, and science. Persian poetry was recited but rarely written down. That changed under the Samanids. They supported poets and scholars who wrote in Persian. They sponsored translations from Arabic into Farsi. They encouraged the collection of old stories, tales of ancient kings, heroes, and empires. This was not just literature. It was cultural memory brought back to life. One of the first major poets they supported was Rudaki. Often called the father of Persian poetry, he wrote about love, seasons, wine, and wisdom. His verses were clear, melodic, and deeply emotional. He proved that Persian could express beauty just like Arabic or Greek. He opened the door for others to follow. Soon, Persian literature blossomed. Poets, historians, and philosophers filled the courts of Bukhara with words. The Samanids didn't stop at poetry. They helped shape Persian identity. Their coins carried Arabic inscriptions as required. But they also featured ancient Persian symbols, sunbursts, lions, fire motifs. Their art blended Islamic designs with older patterns. Their clothing, architecture, and court rituals drew from both worlds. They celebrated Islamic festivals, but also revived Nowruz, the Persian New Year. In doing this, they showed that Persian and Muslim identities could live side by side. Education thrived under Samanid rule. Libraries grew. Scholars debated law, ethics, and science. Some wrote in Arabic, others in Persian. Religious schools trained jurists, but secular learning flourished too. Astronomy, medicine, and philosophy all advanced. Bukhara became a city of books. It was called the Dome of Islam, a place where faith and knowledge walked together. Perhaps the Samanids' most lasting legacy was their role in creating the Shahnameh. This epic, written by Ferdowsi a generation after the Samanids fell, would not have been possible without their groundwork. They preserved the old myths. They funded the scholars who collected the stories. They inspired a vision of Iran that reached back to the time before Islam, back to Cyrus, Darius, and even earlier legends. Through their support, the idea of Iran as a continuous civilization was born again. This cultural revival was also political. By promoting Persian language and history, the Samanids set themselves apart from Arab rulers. They didn't reject Islam, but they made it their own. They showed that being Muslim didn't mean erasing the past. It meant building on it. Their model would shape future dynasties, especially the ones that followed in Central Asia, India, and Iran. Their rule was relatively peaceful. They built canals, roads, and markets. They kept taxes reasonable. They protected merchants and craftsmen. Trade flourished. Goods flowed in from China, India, and the Islamic heartlands. Bukhara and Samarkand became vibrant hubs, not just for commerce, but for culture. The Samanids were also religiously tolerant. While supporting Sunni Islam, they allowed other sects to exist. Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians lived in their cities. Their policies were practical. As long as people paid taxes and caused no trouble, they were free to live their lives. This openness helped attract skilled people from many backgrounds. But like all dynasties, the Samanids faced challenges. Rival Turkic tribes grew stronger. Court intrigues weakened leadership. Slowly, they lost ground. In the late 10th century, they fell to the Ghaznavids and Karakhanids. Yet even in defeat, their legacy endured. The language they revived, the identity they shaped, the pride they restored. These could not be undone. Their fall marks a turning point. The next rulers were Turkic in origin, but they adopted Persian culture. They spoke Persian. They wrote in Persian. They ruled like Persian kings. This was the Samanids' true victory. They had made Persian culture so strong that even foreign conquerors embraced it. In the grand sweep of history, the Samanid era was brief, just over a century. But what they did in that time changed the course of Persian civilization. They didn't build massive monuments. They didn't conquer vast lands. Instead, they rebuilt a soul, a voice, a memory. They reminded Persians of who they were and gave them the tools to tell their story again. The Seljuks began as nomads. They came from the Central Asian steppes, riding horses and living in tents. They spoke a Turkic language. They followed Islam with deep passion. And they were fierce in battle. In the 11th century, they swept into Persia, defeating older powers like the Ghaznavids. At first, they seemed like just another wave of conquerors. But something unexpected happened. Instead of replacing Persian civilization, the Seljuks adopted it. They learned from it. They built upon it. And through them, Persian culture spread even farther than before. The Seljuk rulers quickly realized that they couldn't govern an empire with tribal customs alone. They needed structure. They needed experts. And Persia had plenty. So they hired Persian administrators. These men ran the bureaucracy, managed taxes, and handled court affairs. The Turkic sultans held the sword, but the Persians held the pen. It was a perfect partnership. Together they created a powerful and balanced system. One of the most important figures of this time was Nizam al-Mulk. He was a brilliant Persian vizier who served two Seljuk sultans. He wrote a famous book called the Siyasatnama, or Book of Government. It offered practical advice on ruling justly and efficiently. It drew from Islamic teachings, but also from older Persian traditions. It described how kings should act, how spies should be used, how justice should be delivered. It became a classic of political thought. Under Nizam al-Mulk's guidance, the Seljuks built schools called madrasas. These weren't just religious institutions, they taught law, grammar, philosophy, and science. The most famous was the Nizamiya of Baghdad. Students came from all over the Islamic world. Persian ideas filled the classrooms. Persian teachers shaped the minds of future leaders. The impact was lasting. The Seljuks also embraced Persian art and architecture. In cities like Isfahan, they built mosques with soaring domes and intricate tiles. They expanded the Friday Mosque, creating courtyards and vaults that still stand today. Caravanserais dotted the roads, giving travelers shelter and safety. The buildings reflected Persian design, but also Islamic spirituality. They were beautiful, functional, and enduring. The language of the court was Persian. Even though the rulers were Turkic, they used Persian in administration, poetry, and ceremony. Poets flourished. Writers thrived. Omar Khayyam, a mathematician and poet, lived during this period. His quatrains, short, thoughtful verses, explored love, fate, and the meaning of life. Though not famous in his own time, his work would become legendary centuries later. The Seljuks expanded west. They entered Anatolia after defeating the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert. They took control of large parts of modern-day Turkey. There, too, Persian culture followed. Persian became the language of literature and science. Persian architecture influenced new cities. The Seljuk Turks, wherever they went, carried Persian civilization with them like a treasure. This blending of cultures created a new model. Turkic power, Persian intellect, and Islamic faith worked together. It wasn't always smooth. There were rebellions, power struggles, divisions. But the overall pattern held. The Seljuks showed that conquerors didn't need to erase the past. They could inherit it and pass it on. Their respect for learning also protected ancient knowledge. Persian scholars continued translating Greek and Indian works. They advanced medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. Libraries grew. Hospitals were built. The idea that knowledge was a sacred trust shared by all who sought truth remained strong. Religiously, the Seljuks supported Sunni Islam. They saw themselves as defenders of orthodoxy. They opposed rival sects and built strong institutions. Yet they also allowed room for mysticism. Sufism grew under their rule. Poets like Sanai and Attar wrote deeply spiritual works in Persian. Their ideas would later influence Rumi and others. The soul of Persian Islam grew richer. The Seljuk era was a time of bridges between cultures, ideas, and lands. They connected China to the Mediterranean. They linked the steppes to the cities. They brought together nomads and scholars. And through it all, Persian culture acted as a glue. It gave shape, voice, and color to a diverse and dynamic empire. Even after the Seljuks declined, their legacy lived on. Later dynasties, including the Ottomans, Mughals, and Timurids, followed the same pattern. Turkic rulers using Persian culture to govern Islamic lands. It became a formula for success. A formula the Seljuks had tested and proven. So while the Seljuks were not Persian by blood, they became Persian by choice. They saw its value. They honored its past. They added to its future. And by doing so, they helped make Persian civilization one of the most influential in world history. The Mongols came like a storm, fast, ruthless, relentless. In the early 13th century, they swept through Central Asia, crushing kingdoms and burning cities. Led by Genghis Khan and his generals, they attacked with terrifying precision. Persia once again found itself in the path of an unstoppable force. Cities that had stood for centuries were flattened in days. Populations were slaughtered. Libraries burned. The great centers of learning became fields of ash. The destruction was unlike anything seen before. Nishapur was wiped out. Merv, once home to hundreds of thousands, lost nearly all its people. Historians wrote of mountains made of skulls. The Mongols showed no mercy. They were not interested in culture law or negotiation. They wanted control, total control. Persia had seen invasions before, but this one broke something deeper. And yet the story didn't end there. After the fires faded and the blood dried, the Mongols stayed. They built their own state in Persia, the Ilkhanate. It was part of the larger Mongol Empire, but it focused on the Iranian plateau. The early rulers were still nomadic in style. They camped instead of settling. They distrusted cities. But slowly, something changed. Persia began to transform the Mongols. The first real shift came with Ghazan Khan. He ruled at the end of the 13th century, and he did something remarkable. He converted to Islam. With that one act, everything began to shift. He adopted Persian customs. He rebuilt mosques. He restored roads. He supported scholars. He made Persian the official language of his court. The Mongols were no longer just conquerors. They were now part of Persia. Ghazan's vizier, Rashid al-Din, was even more important. A doctor by training, he became one of the greatest administrators in Persian history. He wrote a vast history of the world called the Compendium of Chronicles. It included Persian legends, Mongol stories, Chinese history, and Islamic narratives. No one had ever tried something like it before. It showed that knowledge could cross borders, that cultures could be shared, not erased. Under the later Ilkhans, Persian art and architecture began to bloom again. Miniature painting returned full of color and detail. Buildings rose in cities like Tabriz and Sultaniya. Domes, tiles, and courtyards reflected older Persian styles. But they also included new influences from China, from Central Asia, from the Mongols themselves. It was a fusion of East and West, of nomad and farmer, of fire and ink. Science recovered too. Astronomers mapped the stars. Doctors studied diseases. Historians gathered records. Philosophers debated faith and reason. The Mongol court, once a place of tents and arrows, became a center of books and ideas. Persian scholars advised the Khans. Persian poets entertained them. Persia had once been destroyed by the Mongols. Now it was shaping them. The Mongols also brought new technologies. They introduced paper-making techniques from China. This made books cheaper and more common. They improved road safety across their empire, which stretched all the way to China. Trade increased. Goods and ideas flowed across the Silk Road. A merchant could travel from Iran to Beijing, protected by Mongol rule. This Pax Mongolica created rare peace across a vast land. Even religion changed. Early Mongols were animists or Buddhists. But by the late 13th century, many had embraced Islam. They sponsored Sufi saints. They helped rebuild shrines. They held festivals that mixed Mongol music with Persian poetry. Over time, the rulers who once tore down minarets now prayed beneath them. It's one of the great ironies of history. The Mongols nearly destroyed Persian civilization, but then they helped revive it. They gave it new shapes, new tools, and new stories. Persian culture proved so deep, so adaptable, that even its worst enemies could not escape its pull. Later dynasties would follow the same pattern. The Timurids, the Safavids, even the Mughals in India, they all traced something back to the Mongols. And yet what they preserved was Persian. Language, art, thought, identity. The Mongol invasion is remembered with pain, but also with pride. Because Persia did not stay broken. It rebuilt. It absorbed. It transformed. And in doing so, it showed once again why it had endured for thousands of years. In the early 1500s, a young warrior priest rose to power in Iran. His name was Shah Ismail. He was only 14 when he launched his first campaign. But he was not just a military leader. He was the head of a mystical Sufi order that believed in divine guidance. His followers saw him as chosen by God. They wore red hats with 12 folds honoring the 12 Shia imams. They were known as the Kizilbash, fierce, loyal, and ready to die for their leader. In 1501, Shah Ismail captured Tabriz and declared himself king. But he did something far more radical. He declared Twelver Shia Islam the official religion of his new state. This was a bold move. Most of the Muslim world at the time was Sunni. The Ottomans in the west were Sunni. The Uzbeks in the east were Sunni. But Ismail chose Shia Islam and forced his entire kingdom to follow. This changed everything. Conversion was not slow or gentle. It happened fast. Preachers were sent across Iran. Sunni mosques were shut down or converted. Sunni scholars were exiled or executed. New Shia rituals were introduced. Ashura processions, lamentations for Imam Hussein, and pilgrimages to Shia shrines became part of public life. The Safavid state funded these practices and made them central to its identity. At first, the people resisted. Most Iranians were still Sunni, but over time they adapted. Generations were raised with Shia teachings. Clerics trained in Najaf and Karbala were invited to Iran. They helped shape a new religious class. The Safavids built seminaries, mosques, and shrines. The sacred cities of Qom and Mashhad grew in importance. Shia Islam was now woven into daily life. But this was not just about religion. It was about building a nation. The Safavids wanted to set Iran apart from its neighbors. Language, law, and culture all supported this. Persian became the language of poetry, philosophy, and government. The Safavid court embraced art and architecture. Painters created intricate miniatures. Calligraphers wrote elegant Qurans. Builders designed dazzling mosques, especially in the capital, Isfahan. Isfahan became a symbol of this new Iran. Shah Abbas the Great, perhaps the most famous Safavid ruler, made it his capital. He built wide avenues, majestic squares, and beautiful bridges. The Imam Mosque, with its blue tiles and massive dome, still stuns visitors today. The city was a blend of beauty, power, and faith. Merchants came from Europe, India, and China. Diplomats praised its splendor. It was both a center of Shia devotion and a hub of global trade. Shah Abbas also reformed the military. He reduced the power of the Kizilbash and created a new standing army. He trained soldiers with firearms and disciplined tactics. He built roads and caravanserais to support trade. He moved Armenian merchants to the new suburb of New Julfa, where they ran silk and textile businesses. Under his rule, Iran became rich and stable. Yet the Safavid commitment to Shia Islam remained central. Religious scholars called mullahs grew more powerful. They helped define Shia law, theology, and ritual. They also influenced politics. The idea grew that a truly Islamic state needed not just a king, but guidance from religious leaders. This idea would echo centuries later in the Islamic Republic of Iran. By making Shia Islam official, the Safavids changed Iran's destiny. The divide with Sunni neighbors deepened. Wars with the Ottomans often had religious tones. The Safavid border became a line not just of land, but of belief. And inside Iran, Shia faith created unity. Different tribes and regions now shared common rituals and saints. Pilgrimage sites united rich and poor. Mourning ceremonies brought together farmers and scholars. The Safavid state had forged a new national identity. This identity proved lasting. Even after the Safavid dynasty collapsed in the 18th century, Shia Islam remained strong. Later rulers might change laws or titles, but the religious foundation stayed firm. Today, Iran is still majority Shia, and many of its traditions, festivals, shrines, theology began in the Safavid age. The Safavids did not simply rule. They redefined what it meant to be Iranian. They gave the country a faith, a style, a vision. They looked back to Persia's ancient past and forward to a new Islamic future. In doing so, they shaped a legacy that endures to this day. The Qajar dynasty began in the late 18th century. After years of chaos following the fall of the Safavids, a tribal leader named Aga Muhammad Khan united much of Iran. He declared himself Shah and founded the Qajar line. His methods were brutal. In Kerman, he blinded thousands as punishment for resistance. But his rule brought a kind of stability. The Qajars held power for over a century. Yet over time, their grip weakened. Internal problems, foreign threats, and public frustration set the stage for a major political shift. From the start, the Qajars faced challenges. They ruled over a diverse land, but lacked the strength to modernize it. Roads were poor. The military was outdated. Corruption was common. Worse still, they faced powerful foreign rivals. Russia pushed from the north. Britain moved in from the south. Both wanted control of Iran's land and resources. The Qajars found themselves caught between two empires. They lost war after war. In the early 1800s, Iran fought Russia in the Caucasus. The result was disaster. By the Treaty of Gulistan in 1813, Iran gave up Georgia. A few years later, the Treaty of Turkmenchay forced them to surrender Armenia and more territory. These were ancestral lands. Their loss cut deep. The treaties also gave Russia special rights inside Iran. British influence grew too. They wanted control of trade routes, especially toward India. The Qajars, desperate for money, granted foreign powers special concessions. These deals were often secret. A British company might receive rights to Iran's railways or mines for almost nothing. In 1872, the Shah gave a British baron control over Iran's industry for 70 years. Even the Russians complained. It was too much. The public, especially merchants and religious leaders, grew angry. They saw their country being sold off. At the same time, Iran faced new ideas. Students who studied in Europe returned home with visions of reform. They spoke of parliaments, constitutions, and citizen rights. They wanted an end to absolute monarchy. They wanted a rule of law. Intellectuals published newspapers. Poets wrote verses calling for justice. Clerics gave sermons warning against foreign control. The air was thick with change. The turning point came in the early 1900s. In 1891, the Shah gave Britain control over Iran's tobacco industry. This sparked a nationwide protest. Religious leaders declared tobacco use forbidden. Merchants closed their shops. Even women joined the boycott. In the end, the Shah backed down. But the message was clear. The people could organize. They had power. A few years later, economic hardship and royal extravagance added more fuel. In 1905, protests erupted in Tehran. Demonstrators called for justice and a constitution. They wanted a parliament, a majlis, to limit the Shah's power. After months of struggle, they succeeded. In 1906, the Shah agreed. Iran's first constitution was written. A parliament was formed. Elections were held. It was a new era. The constitution was inspired by European models but adapted to Iran's reality. It created two chambers. It granted basic rights. It established laws for taxation, property, and free speech. For the first time, the Shah was no longer above the law. Clerics, merchants, and reformers all took part. They argued. They compromised. They believed in a better future. But the revolution was not easy. In 1907, the Shah died. His son opposed the changes. In 1908, with help from Russia, he bombarded the parliament building. Many leaders were killed or arrested. For a moment, the dream seemed lost. But resistance continued. In cities like Tabriz and Isfahan, militias fought back. The Shah was forced to flee. In 1909, he was deposed. Still, the victory was fragile. Foreign powers remained. In 1907, Britain and Russia secretly divided Iran into spheres of influence. The north went to Russia, the south to Britain. Only the center remained neutral. The Iranian government had not been consulted. Once again, Iran's fate was decided by outsiders. Despite these pressures, the idea of constitutionalism survived. It inspired future generations. It created a class of political thinkers and activists. It introduced Iranians to the language of rights and law, and it exposed the limits of royal authority. The Qajar dynasty never recovered. They lingered for another 2 decades, but had lost legitimacy. New leaders, especially in the military, began to rise. One of them, Reza Khan, would soon take power and end the Qajar line for good. But the constitutional revolution left a deep mark. It showed that Iranians were not passive. They could demand change. They could write laws. They could build institutions. Even if their experiment was short-lived, it planted seeds. Seeds that would grow in later movements, and that would one day help shape a new Iran, more modern, more assertive, and more aware of its rights. In the early 20th century, Iran was divided, weak, and humiliated. The Qajar dynasty had lost territory, borrowed money, and surrendered influence to foreign powers. Roads were few, schools were poor, the military was ineffective. Russian and British agents operated freely. Many Iranians felt ashamed. Then, from the ranks of the army, a man emerged who promised order. His name was Reza Khan. He was a soldier, not a scholar. Tough, ambitious, and direct. In 1921, he staged a coup. Within 4 years, he became prime minister. In 1925, he deposed the last Qajar Shah and took the throne himself. He crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. From the start, Reza Shah wanted to modernize Iran. He admired leaders like Ataturk in Turkey. He believed in strong government secular policies and national pride. He saw religion as a private matter, not a guide for politics. He distrusted the old clergy, the tribal leaders, and the foreign diplomats. He wanted to build a state that was independent, united, and modern. He began with the army. He created a national force loyal to him. He trained officers in European methods. He bought new weapons. He made military service mandatory. He used the army to break tribal revolts and disarm regional warlords. Iran was now under central control. The age of autonomous tribes was over. Next, he focused on infrastructure. He ordered roads to be built, thousands of kilometers of them. He connected cities, towns, and borders. He started construction on the Trans-Iranian Railway, linking the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. It crossed mountains and deserts. It symbolized Iran's determination to move forward. He built bridges, tunnels, and new state buildings. Everything was meant to show progress. Education was another priority. Reza Shah created new schools. He pushed for literacy. He sent students to study abroad. He founded Tehran University, the country's first modern institution of higher learning. He wanted Iranians to learn science, law, and engineering. He saw knowledge as the key to strength. At the same time, he changed social customs. He banned traditional dress for men. He forced civil servants to wear European-style suits and hats. He discouraged the wearing of the veil for women. In 1936, he banned it entirely in public spaces. Many women welcomed the change. Others resisted. But the state enforced the law. It was part of his campaign to secularize society. He also reduced the power of the clergy. He took control of religious endowments. He limited the influence of mosques. He introduced civil laws to replace religious courts. Marriage, divorce, and inheritance now followed state codes. The message was clear: Iran would be ruled by reason, not religion. Nationalism played a big role in his policies. He emphasized Iran's ancient heritage. He celebrated Cyrus, Darius, and other pre-Islamic kings. He changed the name of the country from Persia to Iran in 1935. This name came from Aryan, linking the nation to its Indo-European roots. He wanted Iranians to be proud of their identity, not just as Muslims, but as heirs to a great civilization. But Reza Shah's rule was not gentle. He allowed no political parties. He banned independent newspapers. He jailed critics. He exiled rivals. Parliament existed, but only in name. Decisions came from the top. His government was efficient, but it was also harsh. Torture, censorship, and fear kept opponents quiet. Despite his control, he could not keep foreign powers away. In 1939, World War II began. Iran tried to stay neutral, but it held strategic importance. In 1941, British and Soviet troops invaded. They feared Reza Shah was too close to Germany. He was forced to abdicate. His son Mohammad Reza took the throne. The father went into exile and died 3 years later. Reza Shah's legacy is mixed. To some, he was a hero, a man who restored pride, who built roads, schools, and factories, who made Iran stronger, cleaner, and more modern. To others, he was a dictator, a man who silenced religion, who ruled with fear, who ignored the people's voice. But one thing is certain: he changed Iran forever. He moved it from the 19th century into the 20th. He challenged old ways. He demanded discipline. And he believed above all in the power of the state. His son would carry on many of his ideas, but the world was changing fast, and new challenges were just over the horizon. By the late 1970s, Iran was boiling with tension. The Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi ruled with an iron hand. His father had built the modern state. He had continued the project, but pushed it further. He called it the White Revolution. It brought land reform, women's suffrage, and industrial growth. But it also created deep divisions. Wealth was uneven. Rural families were uprooted. Religious leaders were silenced. Critics were jailed by Savak, the Shah's feared secret police. At the same time, Iran grew closer to the West. The United States became the Shah's main ally. To many Iranians, he no longer seemed like a national ruler. He seemed like a foreign puppet. In 1971, the Shah held a lavish celebration for 500 years of Persian monarchy. Foreign guests dined on imported food in golden tents near the ruins of Persepolis. It was meant to honor Iran's history. Instead, it angered the people. Bread was expensive. Jobs were scarce. Protests followed. Then came brutal crackdowns. Fear spread. But so did anger. The opposition came from many sides. Leftists wanted equality. Liberals wanted a constitution. Nationalists wanted independence from foreign influence. But the strongest voice came from the mosques. Religious leaders had long warned against the Shah's policies. Chief among them was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Exiled in 1964, he continued to speak against the regime. His tapes were smuggled into Iran. His words were clear and passionate. He promised justice, dignity, and an Islamic system of governance. In 1978, the protests exploded. It began with a newspaper article insulting Khomeini. Students marched in Qom. The army fired. People died. Mourning ceremonies turned into new protests. Cities erupted. The Shah declared martial law. But the marches grew. Factories shut down. Oil workers joined. Women, students, shopkeepers all walked the streets shouting death to the Shah. The government tried to silence them. But the movement could not be stopped. On September 8th, the military opened fire on demonstrators in Tehran's Jaleh Square. Hundreds were killed. The day became known as Black Friday. That moment broke the last link of trust. Many who had stayed silent now joined the revolt. The Shah lost support from the army, the clergy, and even foreign allies. In January 1979, the Shah left Iran. He said it was for medical treatment, but the people knew it was exile. 2 weeks later, Khomeini returned. Millions filled the streets to greet him. He stepped off the plane calm and composed. Reporters asked how he felt. He answered nothing. His focus was not emotion, it was revolution. In February, the old regime collapsed. Armed groups took over government buildings. Army bases surrendered. The monarchy was gone. But what would take its place at first? There was confusion. Some wanted a democracy. Others wanted a socialist republic. Khomeini had something else in mind. He proposed a new system, an Islamic republic, a country run by Islamic law but with elections. In March, a national vote was held. The question was simple: Islamic republic, yes or no? Over 98% voted yes. A new constitution followed. It included a president and parliament. But it also introduced a new role, the supreme leader. This figure would stand above all others, guarding the revolution's values. The first to hold this post was Khomeini himself. The Islamic Republic was born. The new state moved quickly. Former officials were tried and executed. Savak was dismantled. Morality laws were enforced. Women had to wear the hijab. Western music and movies were banned. Schools were Islamized. Committees called comités monitored neighborhoods. The clergy took control of courts, media, and education. Not everyone agreed. Liberals were pushed out. Leftists were arrested. Ethnic minorities like Kurds and Baluchis demanded more rights, but were crushed. Still, for many Iranians, the revolution brought pride. They had overthrown a king. They had built a new order. Outside Iran, the world watched in shock. The U.S. had lost a major ally. In November 1979, things got worse. A group of students stormed the American embassy in Tehran. They took 52 Americans hostage. They were held for 444 days. The event destroyed U.S.-Iran relations. It also made the revolution global news. Inside Iran, the revolution became a daily reality. The economy slowed. Many fled the country. But the new leadership held firm. Khomeini preached sacrifice, unity, and faith. He said Iran would stand against imperialism, Zionism, and corruption. His words shaped policy. His presence shaped lives. In 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. Saddam Hussein saw the revolution as a chance to grab land. What followed was a brutal 8-year war. Iran lost hundreds of thousands. Cities were bombed. Soldiers died in trenches and minefields. But the war also united the country. The revolution became sacred. Martyrs were honored. The regime grew stronger. By the time Khomeini died in 1989, the Islamic Republic was firmly in control. A new supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, took his place. The state remained Islamic revolutionary and resistant to the West. The 1979 revolution changed Iran forever. It ended 200 to 500 years of monarchy. It introduced a new kind of state, religious nationalist and authoritarian. Some saw it as a betrayal of freedom. Others saw it as a triumph of faith. But all agreed it was one of the most important revolutions of the 20th century. After the revolution, Iran created a political system unlike any other. It mixed religion and republic faith and forced tradition and innovation. At the top stood the supreme leader, a religious figure with final authority over all state matters. Below him were elected officials, including a president and a parliament. On paper, there were checks and balances. In practice, the clerics held the real power. The supreme leader controlled the military, the police, the courts, and the national media. He appointed key positions. He set the tone for foreign policy. He answered to no one. Ayatollah Khomeini held this role until his death in 1989. Then Ali Khamenei took over. Though less charismatic, Khamenei proved politically skilled. He consolidated power and ruled for decades. But the system also allowed elections. Every 4 years, Iranians voted for a president. Every few years, they chose members of parliament and local councils. There were debates, campaigns, and televised speeches. Some elections were competitive. Reformists, conservatives, and independents battled for votes. Voter turnout was often high. To the outside world, Iran looked like a democracy. Yet behind the scenes, the process was tightly controlled. A powerful body called the Guardian Council reviewed all candidates. Made up of clerics and jurists, it could disqualify anyone it didn't approve of. Reformist voices were often blocked. New political movements struggled to survive. The state set the rules and bent them when needed. Still, the election system gave people a voice. Presidents like Mohammad Khatami in the late 1990s pushed for more freedom. He spoke of a dialogue of civilizations and better relations with the West. Young people supported him. So did women and intellectuals. For a moment, hope bloomed. Newspapers flourished. Books were printed. Public debates returned. But the hardliners pushed back. Newspapers were shut down. Activists were arrested. Judges loyal to the clerics handed out harsh sentences. The president's powers were limited. Change came slowly and often reversed. Iran's leaders also maintained a posture of defiance toward the outside world. They rejected Western influence, especially from the United States. The phrase "death to America" became common at rallies. Iran supported groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and opposed Israel at every turn. It presented itself as the voice of the oppressed, the enemy of imperialism, and the champion of Islamic resistance. This global stance brought consequences. Iran faced sanctions. Its economy suffered. Trade was restricted. Banks were cut off. Yet the government used this pressure to rally support. It said the West feared Iran's independence, that foreign powers wanted to control Iranian oil culture and politics. Many citizens agreed, especially after seeing what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Iran pursued a nuclear program. It claimed it wanted energy. The West feared it wanted weapons. Years of tension followed. In 2015, Iran signed a deal with world powers. It agreed to limit uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. The economy improved. Hope returned. But in 2018, the United States withdrew from the deal. Sanctions returned. Iran resumed nuclear activity. The cycle of mistrust continued. At home, society grew more complex. The population was young. Most people were born after the revolution. They grew up with the internet, smartphones, and satellite TV. Many wanted freedom, jobs, and connection with the world. They valued religion, but not always the state's version of it. Women pushed boundaries. Artists found creative ways to express themselves. Musicians went underground. Writers used metaphors. Resistance took quiet forms, but protests still erupted. In 2009, after a disputed election, Millions marched in the streets. They demanded their vote be respected. The regime cracked down. People were beaten, jailed, and silenced. The event became known as the Green Movement. It showed that many Iranians still dreamed of change. Over time, the Islamic Republic adjusted. It allowed more local elections. It softened some restrictions. But the core remained intact. The supreme leader ruled above all. The Revolutionary Guard, a powerful military and economic force, grew stronger. It controlled companies' ports and construction projects. Its influence reached deep into the system. Iran's model confused many observers. It was not fully democratic, but it was not fully dictatorial either. It had parliaments but also religious oversight. It had elections but also vetting. It had vibrant culture but strict controls. It was a hybrid, a theocracy with ballots, a republic with robes. This strange balance gave Iran stability. It survived wars, sanctions, and revolts. It outlasted American presidents and regional monarchs. But it also left the country in constant tension, between modernity and tradition, between popular will and clerical power, between openness and resistance. For over 4 decades, the Islamic Republic stood firm. It built alliances, defied enemies, and projected power across the region. Yet at home, a question remained. Could such a system truly reflect the will of the people? Or would the gap between rulers and ruled only grow wider? Today, Iran stands at a crossroads. The Islamic Republic has survived for more than 40 years. It has faced wars, uprisings, sanctions, and isolation. It has outlasted many of its enemies. Yet inside the country, a deep divide has grown. On one side stands a young, connected, and restless population. On the other side sits a powerful conservative theocracy determined to maintain control. The two live together, but pull in different directions. Iran's population is remarkably young. Over 70% of its citizens were born after the 1979 revolution. They did not live through the monarchy. They did not witness the war with Iraq. They have only known the Islamic Republic. Yet many do not feel it represents them. They go to university. They use smartphones. They watch global films and listen to global music. They are curious, educated, and often frustrated. This younger generation wants more freedom. They want jobs, hope, and dignity. Many of them question the rules they were raised with. They ask why women must cover their hair. They ask why certain books are banned. They ask why political choices are limited. Their questions do not mean they reject their culture or religion, but they do want space to choose for themselves. The government, however, remains strict. Morality police patrol the streets. Women can be fined or arrested for loose hijabs. Social media is filtered. Political protests are met with force. Elections are controlled. Candidates are vetted. Dissent is watched. The state says it protects Islamic values. Many citizens feel it protects only power. This tension has led to growing unrest. In 2009, the Green Movement shook the country. People believed their votes had been stolen. They marched by the millions. The government responded with force. Many were arrested. Some were killed. But the movement planted a seed. It showed the people that they could demand more. Over the next decade, protests continued. In 2017 and 2019, Demonstrations broke out over economic pain. Prices had soared. Wages stayed low. Unemployment hit the youth hardest. The government again cracked down. The internet was shut off. But the anger didn't fade. In 2022, a new wave began. A young woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. She died in custody. Her death sparked national outrage. Protests erupted across the country. Women burned their headscarves. Men marched beside them. Schools, universities, and even bazaars joined the cry. The slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," spread like wildfire. The state responded with brutal force. Hundreds were killed. Thousands were arrested. Yet the protests continued for months. They were not just about clothing. They were about choice, dignity, and justice. They showed how deeply the youth had grown apart from the ruling system. At the same time, Iran faced pressure from abroad. Sanctions from the United States crippled the economy. Inflation soared. The currency lost value. Oil sales dropped. Foreign investment vanished. Many families struggled to afford food, medicine, and housing. The middle class shrank. Corruption worsened. Yet the government blamed outside forces, not its own policies. Despite hardship, the people adapted. They built underground networks. They used VPNs to bypass censorship. They taught themselves languages, art, and coding. Iran became one of the most connected countries, despite having one of the most closed systems. Artists created films full of metaphor. Writers used history to comment on the present. Musicians shared songs through encrypted apps. Resistance took many forms. Women played a central role. Despite restrictions, they entered universities in large numbers. They became doctors, lawyers, engineers, and artists. They pushed boundaries. Many refused to wear hijabs in the way the state demanded. They protested quietly every day with their presence. They reminded the world that change often begins in silence. Yet the theocracy held on. It used security forces, courts, and propaganda. It painted protesters as foreign agents. It jailed journalists. It silenced musicians. It banned books. But with each act of repression, the gap grew wider. The future remains uncertain. Some believe the system will reform itself. Others say only a new revolution can bring change. Many fear chaos if the state collapses. Others see hope in a younger generation that refuses to be silent. What is clear is that the current balance cannot last forever. Iran's story today is one of contradiction. A society full of energy, beauty, and talent governed by a system that fears its own people. A land with ancient roots struggling to find its future. A country that once lit the world with science and poetry, now burning with protest and hope. Whatever happens next, Iran will continue to matter. Its culture is too deep. Its people are too proud. Its history is too powerful. The question is not whether Iran will change. The question is how and when.